I knew things had gone completely off the rails the moment my HOA president, the same woman who'd spent 6 months trying to run me out of my own neighborhood, stood on my dock with shaking hands, digging through her Gucci purse just to pay me a $100 fee to let her grandkids touch water she never owned. And the wildest part, she had no clue that the lake she tried so hard to keep me away from was about to legally belong to me. You want to know how we got here? Buckle in, because this is the story of how a petty HOA war turned into a full-scale collapse of a mini-dictator's empire, and how I went from trespassing to landlord. 6 months earlier, I was just a tired veteran looking for peace. 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, a divorce that split my savings clean in half, and a body that felt older than my actual age. All I wanted was a quiet place to breathe. The realtor showed me this ranch-style home in Willowbrook Estates, Colorado. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, but the backyard. It opened directly onto Mirror Lake, 12 acres of glassy, pine-ringed water that looked like something out of a postcard. The kind of place you imagine when someone asks where your happy place is. I paid $20 grand over asking just for that lake access. First morning after moving in, I stood on the old cedar dock with my fishing rod already assembled, breathing air that felt cleaner than anything I'd inhaled in years. For the first time in forever, I felt like maybe life was going to calm down. Maybe the worst was behind me. Turns out the peaceful phase lasted exactly 14 days. On day 15, she arrived, Bethany Cromwell, 52 years old, real estate attorney, HOA president for 8 uninterrupted years, married to a city councilman, and the kind of person who measures her lawn with a ruler. If you picture a Karen, multiply it by 10, add a law degree, and give her a power complex measured in megatons. I was in my garage installing electrical outlets when the mail truck pulled up. Thick envelope, embossed HOA logo, cream-colored stationery that screamed pretentious. The letter inside made my blood pressure spike so fast I could feel it pulsing in my eardrums. Dear Mr. Lennox. It began in looping cursive. There has been a misunderstanding regarding lake access. Mirror Lake is permanently restricted to charter families only. Any unauthorized use constitutes trespassing and will result in fines of $50 per day. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking. This woman, this stranger, was telling me I had no right to touch the water behind my own house. The same water I'd paid extra for. The same water listed in every document I'd signed. That night I learned I wasn't the only one. 3 other newer families had gotten the same letter. All newcomers. All people without the legacy status Bethany worshipped like royalty. I walked into the HOA meeting the next week with my deed, my contract, and enough military discipline to stay calm. The room smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. Bethany sat at the front like she was chairing Congress, not a basement meeting. When I tried to show my paperwork, she smiled at me like you'd smile at a toddler who just spilled juice. "Oh, Marcus," she said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so sorry your realtor misled you." Then she introduced a new regulation out of nowhere, a $500 annual lake maintenance fee for anyone who wasn't a charter member. She called an immediate vote, counted shady proxy ballots from people who weren't even in the room, and passed it right there. I stood up and tried to push back, telling her it was illegal to spring emergency votes without proper notice. Her husband, sitting smugly in the back row, chimed in with his city council voice, saying the board had every right. If you've ever felt an entire room silently telling you, "Give up, you won't win," that was exactly how it felt. But then Bethany made her first mistake. She handed me a violation notice for my garden shed, the same shed that had been there long before I bought the house, and cited a rule that actually exempted existing structures. She was so used to bullying people that she didn't expect anyone to read the fine print. I read it, and I smiled. That night I walked the entire neighborhood photographing every shed, every illegal fence, every charter member breaking the same rules she said I was violating. It hit me she didn't enforce rules. She enforced hierarchy. If you weren't one of her people, you didn't belong. Then the harassment campaign started. Not slowly, like a switch flipped. A citation under my windshield for parking in my own driveway. Noise complaints because I used power tools at 3 p.m. on a weekday. A warning for leaving electrical conduit on my porch overnight. A note saying my garbage can was visible for 20 minutes past pickup time. Every day something new. And she didn't stop there. A certified letter came saying I was now considered non-compliant and the HOA could start foreclosure proceedings if I didn't cough up $4,700 in corrections. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter, listening to my coffee maker sputter like it was mocking me. I felt something I hadn't felt since my lowest point during my divorce, that trapdoor feeling where your stomach drops and your brain whispers, maybe they win this one. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you should just sell and walk away. I actually wondered if I'd made a mistake buying this house. Maybe this wasn't my new beginning. Maybe I was just cursed to fight battles forever. But then I met Jane Kowalski, HOA attorney, razor-sharp, no-nonsense, and exactly the ally I needed. I paid for a consultation expecting her to shrug and say, "Yep, you're screwed." Instead, she spread documents across her desk like she was examining a crime scene. "Your HOA president's husband has received over $200,000 in no-bid contracts," she said. "Selective enforcement, conflict of interest, fraud. This isn't about rules, it's about control." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. Then came the twist. 2 days after we filed ethics complaints, someone slashed my tires. My security cameras caught a figure skulking around, but the footage was too grainy. What that person didn't know, I had a hidden camera in my garage. The next morning, I caught Bethany herself walking through my driveway at 6 a.m., taking close-up photos of my electrical meter, my foundation, my shed, trespassing on my property to fabricate violations. When the cops showed up and I showed them the footage, the officer just sighed and muttered, "HOA presidents with too much time." And if that wasn't enough, Frank Rivera, the quiet Navy vet, showed up at my door with a manila envelope full of 20 years of financial irregularities he'd been too scared to expose. "This neighborhood used to be good," he said, until she turned it into her personal ATM. The deeper we dug, the more rot we found. Fake expenses, phantom maintenance, landscaping bills for places no one had touched in years. It was corruption stacked on corruption. But the biggest twist, the nuclear bomb, came from a dusty records room at the county office. I was sitting under harsh fluorescent lights flipping through documents older than my grandparents when I realized something that made my heart pound so hard I could hear it echoing in my head. The HOA didn't own Mirror Lake. They never had. The original developer went bankrupt before transferring the lake. The county had been taxing the HOA by mistake. Legally, Mirror Lake was unclaimed property. And as the adjacent landowner, I had first rights to buy the entire thing for back taxes, about $3,200. I swear I sat there in that stale office chair laughing like a crazy person. Not because it was funny, but because after months of harassment, threats, and fines, the ultimate revenge had just dropped into my lap. If I bought the lake, I could legally control access. I could set the rules. I could charge fees. And the HOA, whose entire property value depended on lake privileges, would have to negotiate with me. But best of all, every dollar Bethany ever collected for lake maintenance suddenly became evidence of fraud. Jane nearly fell out of her chair when I told her. We filed the paperwork to start the 90-day auction process. I quietly began planning a full dock reconstruction, a legitimate, environmentally compliant marina. I played it cool in public, acting defeated, so Bethany wouldn't suspect a thing. But of course she found out eventually. A legal notice printed in the newspaper, tiny, buried between foreclosure listings. But she saw it. She always saw everything. Frank called me in a panic that night. She knows. Emergency meeting in an hour. I showed up just to watch the chaos. Bethany stood at the front in her most expensive power suit, clutching her notes with white knuckles, announcing that a hostile neighbor was trying to steal the lake through loopholes. Her solution: a special assessment, $5,000 per household, to outbid me at the auction. But then she said something she shouldn't have. Something that would destroy her. "This lake has been our community's crown jewel for 15 years. We've invested hundreds of thousands in maintenance." 47 witnesses heard it. She had just publicly admitted to spending community funds on property she had no legal right to control. When public comments opened, I stood up slowly. "Bethany," I said, pulling out my phone, "exactly. When did the HOA acquire legal title to Mirror Lake? Because according to county records, it's been unclaimed for over a decade." The room exploded into whispers. Board members looked horrified. Even her husband lost color in his face. She tried doubling down with a smear campaign. Anonymous flyers claiming I was dishonorably discharged. Letters to my contracting clients saying I did unsafe electrical work. Late-night hang-up calls. She even tried bribing a county clerk to delay the auction. But everything she did left a trail, and Jane documented every last bit of it. When auction day finally arrived, the courthouse steps looked like a protest rally. Veterans lined up behind me. News crews rolled their cameras. Charter members stood awkwardly on the other side, suddenly wondering if they'd backed the wrong horse. The bidding went fast. $3,000, $25,000, $40,000, $65,000. Her Denver attorney was sweating bullets. I kept bidding, calm, steady, patient. At $70,000 he froze, checked his phone, shook his head. The auctioneer raised her gavel. Going once, going twice, sold. Applause erupted behind me. Someone clapped me on the back. Frank saluted. Reporters shoved microphones in my face. But I had only one thing left to say. I walked to the podium, held up the deed, and said, "For 15 years, this HOA has been collecting dues for a lake they never owned, issuing fines they had no right to issue, and weaponizing authority they never had. Today that ends." Bethany completely lost control, screaming about outsiders, yelling that the lake belonged to founding families. Her voice cracked. Her face turned crimson, and the cameras caught every second. Deputy Williams approached with 2 CBI agents. "Ma'am, there are warrants for your arrest. Fraud, embezzlement, harassment, trespassing, attempted bribery, conspiracy." They cuffed her right there on the courthouse plaza in front of all 47 homeowners she'd ruled over like a tyrant for 8 straight years. As they walked her past me, I lifted the deed just slightly, not gloating, just reminding her. This is what happens when you push the wrong person. And that's where the story ends. Not with celebrations, not with parties, but with the sound of handcuffs clicking shut on the person who thought she could bully me into submission. Some battles you don't choose, but if you're forced into them, you might as well win so decisively that no one ever tries you again. And the lesson is simple. Bullies thrive on fear until someone shows them they picked the wrong victim.